Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's coming up to test time, so what we're going to do is go ahead and practice all the methods of solving that you need. That's going to be the factoring, the quadratic formula, and then also complete the square. So for the first problem, you have to do this problem two different ways. You're going to solve it by factoring and the quadratic formula. I'll do it both ways for you. So to do by factoring or quadratic formula, you need to set it equal to 0. So 5x squared plus 9x, and I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides, and now it equals 0. So my a term is 5, my b term is 9, my c term is negative 2. So to factor, I'm going to multiply 5 and negative 2, which is negative 10, and I need to find numbers that multiply to negative 10 and add to the middle, which is 9. So let's see, 1 and 10, 2 and 5, it's got to be one of those. Where can I put the negatives that they add to 9? How about right there? So those are the numbers I'm going to use. I'm going to split the middle, 5x squared minus 1x plus 10x minus 2. GCF between those two is x, 5x minus 1. GCF between those two is 2, 5x minus 1. Since those are the same, that's usually a good sign, 5x minus 1, and the other factor will be x plus 2. And I want to know when these things equal 0. So when this one's easy, x plus 2 equals 0 when x equals negative 2, so that's one of my answers. And if you're not sure how to do this, when 5x minus 1 equals 0, you would add 1, and then you would divide by 5, which is 1/5. We'll put 0.2. So negative 2 and positive 0.2 are my two answers. Now I'm going to do the same problem with the quadratic formula, which is right here, but I should get the same answer. It's the same problem, right? They have the same zeros. So for quadratic formula, first thing I always do is the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, so that would be 9 squared minus 4 times a times c. So that's 81 plus 80, which is 161. No, hold on. Let me type that in. 40. That's what it is. It's 40. Go back. Okay, 81 plus, this is 20 times 2 is 40, so that's 121. There we go. The discriminant is 121. That's the part underneath the square root. That's going to be 121. Now, since that's a perfect square, I know this is factorable. Well, I already did it, so I know it's factorable. But 121 is positive, which means I'm going to have two answers, and it's a perfect square, which means the problem is factorable. I've shown that already. So let's do the actual quadratic formula now. The opposite of b, the opposite of 9 is negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 121 over 2a. 2 times 5 is 10. Now this is pure calculator work, folks. So once you get the quadratic formula set up, we're just going to type it in. We're going to say negative 9, but I'm going to put the numerator in parentheses. Negative 9 plus radical 121 divided by 10. One of my answers is 0.2. I come back up here and I'll just change that to a minus sign. And my other answer is negative 2. So 0.2 and negative 2, same answers. Good. I know I did it right. Let's try another one. We'll start off with the quadratic formula and then we'll do complete the square. So for quadratic formula equals 0. Great. Let's do the discriminant. B squared minus 4ac. That would be negative 16 squared minus 4ac. So I'll use a calculator this time, make sure I do it right. We're going to go negative 16. It doesn't actually matter. It's negative if you put it in the parentheses, which you're supposed to do. Minus 4, 164, and I get 0. Okay, so the discriminant is 0. That tells me, number one, it's factorable because 0 is a perfect square. And when the discriminant is 0, I'm going to add and subtract 0, and it's only going to give me one answer. So let me show you what I mean. The opposite of b, the opposite of negative 16, is 16 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 2a. 2 times, remember that's a 1. 2 times 1 is 2. So what happens here is when you have the square root of 0, that's 0. Adding 0 is the same as subtracting 0. So this really doesn't matter. It's just going to be 16 divided by 2. That means the only solution is x equals 8. That's where the vertex is. If you remember on the x-axis, the vertex is going to open up and it's going to look something like that. This is 8, 0. Is what's happening on the graph. There's only one solution. Now, if I do complete the square, to complete the square, you need to get your x's on one side, and I'm going to leave myself a blank, and you got to move the c term to the other side. So that's negative 64 plus something. And to complete the square, I like to draw the picture, so I'll sketch it out here. It's always x and then half of b, so minus 8. X minus 8. The corner is 8 by 8, so we're going to add 64 to both sides. So 64, 64. Now when we factor, we have x minus 8 times x minus 8, so that's x minus 8 squared. And on the right side, 64 negative 64 makes 0. Now when I square root both sides to solve, I get x minus 8 equals 0. And the last thing I need to do is add 8 to both sides, so x equals 8. Hey, good. Same answer. Again, it's the same problem. You better get the same answer. Number 3, we're going to do this one complete the square and by factoring. So to complete the square, I need to get my x's on one side, so I'll subtract 9x. And I need to move this to the other side, so I'll subtract 14. Bothers me. There we go. So we'll draw a picture. Let's see. X minus half of 9 is 4.5. So my factors are going to be a little bit trickier this time. And then if I want to do 4.5 squared, again, you can use your calculator. You should be able to do this with fractions a little bit easier, but 4.5 squared is 20.25. So I'm going to add 20.25 to both sides. Now when I factor, I get x minus 4.5 squared, see, it's right there, you don't have to do anything, equals 20.25 minus 14 is 6.25. Now I'm going to solve it by undoing the squared, and I get x minus 4.5 equals plus or minus the square root of 6.25. 6.25 is 2.5. And then to get x by itself, you add 4.5, so 4.5 plus or minus 2.5. So on my calculator, I'll do 4.5 plus 2.5, 4.5 minus 2.5. So my answers are 7 and 2. X equals 7, x equals 2. Now let's see if we get the same thing by factoring. So to factor, get everything on one side, x squared minus 9x plus 14, you want it to equal 0 when you solve by factoring. Now we have to find numbers that multiply to 1 times 14. So what multiplies to 14 and adds to negative 9? Let's see, 1, 14, 2, 7. If I make both of those negative, I get negative 9. So x squared minus 2x minus 7x. We split the middle into those two numbers. GCF is x. GCF is 7. So my factors are x minus 7 and x minus 2. And when those factors equal 0 are at 7 and 2. So x equals 7, x equals 2. Same answers? Cool. Let's try another one. Number 4, factoring, complete the square. So to factor, I'm going to find numbers that multiply to 1 times 30, which is 30, and add to 17. 1 and 30, 2 and 15, we did it again, 2 and 15. So x squared plus 2x plus 15x plus 30 equals 0. GCF is x. Between the first two terms, GCF is 15 between the second two terms. One of my factors is x plus 15, the other is x plus 2. And I want to know when these factors equal 0. X plus 15 equals 0 at negative 15, and x plus 2 equals 0 at negative 2. So negative 15 and negative 2. Now let's do it by completing the square. So to do that, I'm going to move everything that's not an x on the other side. So x squared and 17x stay on one side. The 30 is going to move to the other side. And I know I'm going to complete the square. Again, we're going to have decimals. So x plus half of 17 is 8.5. So x plus 8.5. Let's go ahead and square that out, see what we get. 8.5 squared is 72.25. So I'm going to add 72.25 to both sides. Eesh. Not a lot of space. On the left side, that's x plus 8.5. I've got it factored right here, remember, equals. On the right side, 72 minus 30 is going to be 42, and the decimal comes off to the right. Now, we square root both sides. So we're going to square root 42.25, square root 42.25, which is 6.5. So x plus 8.5 equals 6.5. Remember, that's plus or minus. And when you get x by itself, you have to undo the addition. So you're going to subtract 8.5 on both sides, and then you have to add or subtract the plus or minus there, 6.5. So negative 8.5 plus 6.5, that's negative 2. And negative 8.5 minus 6.5, 8 and 6 make 14. The 0.5s make 15, so that would be negative 15. So my answers are again, negative 2 and negative 15. Awesome. We're cruising. Number 5, complete the square. All right, x squared minus 8x plus something equals 33 plus something. So let's see, when I draw my picture, I'm going to do x minus 4 on both sides, and then that means the corner is going to be 16. So add 16. You have x minus 4 squared equals 33 and 16 make 49. Square root both sides. X minus 4 equals, the square root of 49 is plus or minus 7. Add 4 to both sides. And then we got to figure out what 4 plus 7 is. That'd be 11. And 4 minus 7 is negative 3. So x equals 11 or x equals negative 3. Now we'll do quadratic formula, and we're going to start off with the discriminant. So b squared negative 8 squared minus 4a. Now make sure that you remember to move that 33 over because c is negative 33. So 4ac. Before you do quadratic formula, it's got to equal 0. So that's going to be 64 plus 120 and 12 is 132. So that comes out to 196. Hey, that's a perfect square. That's 14 squared. I know that that makes this problem factorable. I already did it with complete the square, but it's also factorable too. Let's go ahead and now do the quadratic formula. The opposite of b, the opposite of negative 8 is 8 plus or minus the square root of 196 over 2a. 2 times 1 is 2. So we're just going to type it in. 8, remember the numerator's got to be in parentheses. 8 plus radical 196 divided by 2, 11. And when I make it a minus sign, I get negative 3. So 11, negative 3. Hey, same answers. All right, I know I did it right. Number 6, start off quadratic formula, but this one's a little goofy. 12x squared minus 18x, and then you can say plus 0 if you want. If you need to know what c is, it's 0 in this problem, but you got to get everything on one side to do it in both of these methods. So the discriminant is negative 18 squared minus 4ac. Wait a minute. 4 times 12 times 0, that's going to be 0. So this is just coming out to be 18 squared. So 324. The discriminant is 324. Well, that's a perfect square. It's 18 squared. So I know it's factorable. Now we'll do the quadratic formula. The opposite of b, the opposite of negative 18 is positive 18 plus or minus the square root of 324. 2a, 2 times 12 is 24. Now it's pure calculator work. From here on out, I just got to type it in. So numerator in parentheses, this 18 plus the square root of 18. Oh, wait a minute. 324 is going to be 18. This is going to be kind of tricky. Over 24. So one of them is 1.5, and the other one, get in there, is going to be 0 because 18 minus 18 is 0. So 1.5 and 0. X equals 1.5, x equals 0. Now let's do it by factoring. That's actually really easy in this problem because the only thing you're going to do is GCF. So the GCF here would be 6x, and you would be left with 2x minus 3. And I want to know when these factors equal 0. Well, 2x minus 3 equals 0 when you add 3 and divide by 2. So one of them is 3 halves. Hey, that's 1.5 as a decimal. The other one is, when does 6x equal 0? 6x equals 0 when x is 0. So don't forget, that is an answer, 0 and 1.5. When you do it with quadratic formula, you don't think too much about it. But when you factor out that x, that means that 0 is going to be one of your solutions, or zeros. 2 to go. Number 7, solve by factoring. First thing we got to do, get everything on one side. So I'm going to subtract 10 on both sides. Now I have negative 49. Factoring. Let's see. It's got 2 terms. Wait a minute. 2 terms. GCF? No, there's no GCF. Dots. The square root of 4x squared is 2x. The square root of 49 is 7. So it's 2x plus 7, 2x minus 7. So then when you solve these equations, you would either subtract 7 and then divide by 2. And since you're going to have a plus and a minus, it's plus or minus 7.2, which is 3.5 as a decimal. Quadratic formula, when we do b squared minus 4ac, b in this problem is 0, 0x. So b is 0. So b squared would be 0 squared minus 4ac. Okay, so I'm going to multiply negative 4 well, I'll type it all in so you guys can see, but 0 squared obviously is 0. So 0 squared minus 4ac, and I get negative 784. Wait a minute. What did I do wrong? Oh, it's negative 49. There you go. C is negative 49. I'm like, that can't be right. Gave me no solution. Go back up here. Make that negative 49. Yeah, negative 40. Okay. 784. Positive 784. Okay, so the discriminant is not 0. It is 784. Now I'm going to do the rest of the quadratic formula. The opposite of b. The opposite of 0 is 0 plus or minus the square root of 784 over 2a. 2 times 4 is 8. So this is just the square root of 784 divided by 8. The square root of 784 divided by 8, because 0 plus or minus doesn't matter. So it's positive 3.5 or negative 3.5. Oh yeah, same thing, plus or minus 3.5. Okay. One more quadratic formula. First, get everything on one side. 3x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. So we'll do the discriminant. B squared, 2 squared minus 4. A is 3. C is negative 8. So that would come out to, let's see, I'll just type it in. 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 8. 100. Okay? Discriminant's 100. Perfect square. 2 solutions. It's factorable. It's going to be 2 solutions. Opposite of B. So remember, using this, it's got to be in standard form. The opposite of b would be negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 100 over 2a. 2 times 3 is, I'll just write 6. It's easier if you do that in your head. Now I'm going to type that in, but again, you don't need to, you can do this without the calculator. Negative 2 plus, because the square root of 100 is 10, you don't really need a calculator. Negative 2 plus the square root of 100 divided by 6. So 1.3 or negative 2. So x equals 1.3 repeating, that's 4/3 or negative 2. Now let's do it by factoring. So we're going to multiply 3 and negative 8. We need to find numbers that multiply to negative 24, and they have to add to the middle, which is 2. So 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. Wait a minute, 4 and 6. There you go, negative 4. Negative 4, positive 6. So now my factoring would be 3x squared minus 4x plus 6x minus 8. The GCF between the first two terms is x, 3x minus 4. Bring the minus sign down. The GCF between those two, 3x. Why is it minus 4? Something's wrong. We got a sign here. Oh, plus 6x plus 2 minus 4. There we go. Negative 4 and positive 6. There we go. See, if the signs don't work out, you'll figure it out because it just doesn't work. If these aren't the same, like I caught it, I'm like, something's wrong. So 3x minus 4 is one of my factors. The other one is x plus 2. I want to know when they equal 0. So you would add 4 and divide by 3. That's 4/3. Or subtract 2. Hey, 4/3 is 1.3 repeating. You get the same thing. So solving these problems using multiple methods verifies that you know what you're doing. And on tomorrow's test, you need to be able to choose an appropriate method and solve. So good luck.